less than 1,400 miles separate Caracas from Miami. Across that stretch of water, U.S. strike aircraft can reach Venezuelan airspace in under 90 minutes. Once authorization is granted, airborne units can begin moving within a single day. These are not projections. They are standing capabilities, calculated and rehearsed long before any crisis appears on the news. Every year, an estimated tens of billions of dollars in narcotics revenue moves through routes tied to northern South America and into U.S. cities. The numbers are tracked quietly: flight times, deployment windows, revenue flows filed into briefings most people never see and rarely question. For years, these figures meant very little. They were background data, useful mainly to planners and analysts. In another context, none of this would demand attention. That changed in early November 2025, when the White House publicly signaled that military options against Venezuela were no longer off the table. The same numbers that once described distance and logistics now began to define how fast events could unfold and how little room for error might remain once the clock starts moving. This is not primarily about drugs. It is not simply a question of cartel violence spilling across borders, nor is it a humanitarian intervention framed around instability or governance failure. Those explanations dominate headlines because they are easy to understand and politically convenient. What is being discussed publicly misses the core issue. The debate focuses on symptoms, trafficking routes, enforcement failures, criminal networks, while avoiding the underlying strategic dynamics that shape state behavior. Drugs provide the language. Power provides the logic. The real danger lies elsewhere. It lies in the assumption that military pressure can be applied without transforming the conflict itself. It lies in the belief that force can remain limited once introduced, that escalation can be managed from one side alone, and that the adversary will respond according to expectations set in Washington rather than realities on the ground. The risk does not come from what is visible. It comes from what is structurally embedded. A confrontation between a global power seeking to demonstrate resolve and a regional regime that views survival as non-negotiable. In this context, motives matter less than incentives, and intentions matter less than constraints. This situation represents a strategic collision, not a policy dispute. One side operates under domestic pressure to act decisively. The other operates under existential pressure to resist at all costs. When these conditions align, outcomes are rarely shaped by stated goals. They are shaped by escalation dynamics that neither side fully controls. What we are witnessing is not a debate about enforcement. It is the early phase of a confrontation where misinterpretation, signaling, and credibility carry more weight than public explanations ever will. Viewed through a strategic lens, the behavior of both Washington and Caracas follows a familiar logic. States do not respond to situations as outsiders expect them to. They respond according to internal pressures, perceived threats, and the costs of inaction. From the perspective of the White House, the calculation begins at home. Rising overdose deaths, persistent border insecurity, and a long-running perception of enforcement failure create a demand for visible action. Venezuela appears as a contained target. Identifiable leadership, defined territory, and a narrative that links external force to domestic relief. This creates a political incentive to act, even when the strategic payoff remains uncertain. Here is where the calculation diverges. What looks like a pressure campaign from Washington looks like an existential threat from Caracas. For the Venezuelan leadership, compromise does not promise stability. It signals vulnerability. In that environment, restraint becomes dangerous, and escalation becomes a form of insurance. This creates a dangerous asymmetry. One side seeks credibility through decisive action. The other seeks survival through resistance. If you believe pressure will force restraint, press 1. If you believe survival logic guarantees escalation, press 9. These assumptions do not intersect, they collide. Inside the decision-making logic of the Venezuelan state, the objective is not victory in conventional terms. It is deterrence through complication. By raising the perceived costs of intervention, political, military, and geopolitical, the regime attempts to shift the calculus in Washington away from action and toward hesitation. The risk emerges when both sides interpret the same signals differently. A warning intended as deterrence is read as provocation. A show of resolve is interpreted as preparation for attack. In such conditions, decisions are made less on intent and more on fear of being outpaced. At this stage, neither actor believes it is escalating irresponsibly. Each believes it is responding rationally to pressure imposed by the other, and it is precisely this alignment of rational choices that creates the conditions for outcomes no one publicly claims to want. History offers a familiar pattern. When a stronger power confronts a weaker state, the outcome is rarely determined by raw capability alone. It is shaped by how each side interprets risk, time, and survival. This logic has appeared before, not in identical circumstances, but in structurally similar situations. We have seen this sequence unfold repeatedly. A dominant actor assumes that pressure will produce compliance because it controls escalation tools. A weaker actor assumes that resistance, even at extreme cost, is the only viable strategy because surrender carries unacceptable consequences. The stronger side expects speed. The weaker side plans for duration. These expectations cannot be reconciled. This logic does not depend on error or incompetence. Even when leaders are fully aware of the risks, escalation still occurs. The stronger power applies force incrementally, believing control can be maintained through superiority and restraint. The weaker power responds by expanding the conflict space, introducing uncertainty, and raising costs in areas the stronger actor did not initially prioritize. What repeats is not the battlefield, but the structure of incentives. Limited objectives collide with unlimited stakes. The stronger actor seeks to demonstrate resolve without becoming trapped. The weaker actor seeks to entangle the stronger actor precisely because entanglement offsets material disadvantage. Over time, the cost curve bends toward the defender not because it is winning, but because it refuses to collapse. This pattern persists across geography and era. The actors change, the language changes, the technologies evolve, but the sequence remains consistent. Confidence gives way to commitment. Commitment gives way to entrenchment. And entrenchment steadily narrows the available exits. Each additional step is justified as necessary to protect the investment already made. The critical lesson is not that intervention always fails. It is that intervention transforms the problem it aims to solve. What begins as a limited action becomes a test of credibility. Once credibility is at stake, disengagement is no longer evaluated on strategic grounds alone, but on reputational cost. At that point, staying becomes easier than leaving, even when staying produces diminishing returns. This is why historical patterns matter, not because they predict outcomes precisely, but because they reveal constraints that persist regardless of intent, leadership, or declared objectives. When decision-makers believe their case is exceptional, history becomes most relevant because that belief has appeared before. The turning point did not come with explosions. It did not arrive through troop movements, airstrikes, or formal declarations. It arrived quietly, through signaling that altered how both sides calculated risk. What changed everything was not action, but positioning. A sequence of public statements and diplomatic gestures reframed the confrontation from a bilateral dispute into something far more complex. The message was not aimed at public opinion. It was directed at planners and decision-makers, evaluating escalation thresholds. This alters the cost calculation. Once a conflict is no longer contained between two actors, intervention stops being a question of capability and becomes a question of exposure. Every potential move now carries implications beyond the immediate theater. From this moment forward, uncertainty becomes a strategic tool. By signaling openness to broader external alignment, the weaker actor injects ambiguity into timelines, response limits, and escalation ladders. The objective is not to trigger immediate conflict, but to force hesitation by complicating prediction. Once this signal is sent, prior assumptions erode. Plans built around speed and decisiveness must now account for delay and friction. What was framed as a limited operation begins to resemble a broader test involving credibility and restraint. The stronger actor faces a narrowing dilemma. Responding forcefully risks accelerating escalation. Responding cautiously risks appearing deterred. In both cases, the original objective becomes harder to isolate from its wider strategic consequences. This is how signaling reshapes momentum, not by changing intent, but by redefining consequences. Each subsequent move must now be weighed for how it will be interpreted by observers beyond the immediate confrontation. At this stage, no orders need to be issued. The crisis has already shifted from action to calculation, and control begins to slip not through error, but through expansion of the strategic space itself. At this stage, the options narrow. What once appeared as a menu of policy choices now resembles a corridor with walls closing in from both sides. Each possible move carries costs that extend beyond the original objective. What happens if force is applied? Military action may succeed tactically, but it immediately reframes the confrontation. Casualties, retaliation, and regional spillover become variables that cannot be contained by intent alone. A limited operation risks becoming an open-ended commitment, not because of failure, but because disengagement acquires its own price. How does the other side respond when survival is at stake? Escalation does not require parity. It requires persistence. The weaker actor does not need to win battles. It needs to ensure that the stronger actor pays continuously for every step forward. Over time, endurance replaces momentum as the decisive factor. What happens if restraint is chosen instead? Delay may reduce immediate risk, but it introduces another problem: perception. Signals meant to de-escalate can be read as hesitation. Deterrence weakens not through defeat, but through doubt about willingness to act. If you believe restraint preserves long-term control, press 1. If you believe it only deepens the trap, press 9. At that point, the options narrow further. Escalate and absorb mounting costs. Pause and risk erosion of credibility. Withdraw and accept strategic setback. None of these paths restore the situation to its earlier state. Each represents a different form of loss. This is the core of the deadlock. The problem is no longer how to achieve the initial objective. It is how to avoid outcomes that are progressively worse. Decision makers are forced to choose not between success and failure, but between degrees of damage. In such conditions, decisions tend to drift. Not because leaders lack resolve, but because every clear choice appears costly. The longer the stalemate persists, the more momentum shifts from deliberate strategy to reactive management. This is how crises harden. Not through a single dramatic decision, but through accumulation of commitments, expectations, and risks that leave no clean exit available. This is not pessimism, it is pattern recognition. Nothing unfolding here is unprecedented when viewed through the structure of great power behavior. The signals, incentives, and constraints align in ways history has revealed repeatedly, even when leaders insist their circumstances are unique. The tragedy is not ignorance, but refusal to learn. The information required to anticipate risk exists long before decisions are made. The dynamics of escalation are documented and understood. Yet each cycle begins with the assumption that past failures do not apply and that control can be preserved through determination alone. What makes this moment dangerous is not intent. Neither side seeks catastrophe. Both operate under pressures that reward firmness and punish retreat. In such environments, restraint appears risky, while escalation appears decisive. Rational actors following these incentives can still produce outcomes no one publicly desires. This confrontation is not about a single policy choice. It reflects a deeper belief that power can be applied without reshaping the system in which it operates. Once force enters the equation, objectives expand, perceptions shift, and secondary effects begin to dominate decision-making. The original problem fades, replaced by concerns over credibility and precedent. Warnings rarely fail because they are inaccurate. They fail because they are inconvenient. Acknowledging structural risk complicates narratives and challenges assumptions that have guided strategy for decades. It is easier to promise control than to accept constraint. History will judge this moment by consequences, not intentions. Intervention may disrupt networks or shift alignments temporarily. It rarely resolves the conditions that produce the crisis. More often, it transfers instability forward, laying the groundwork for the next confrontation. The outcome will surprise no one who understands the logic. Escalation and entanglement are not anomalies. They are predictable results of narrowing choices. If you believe these lessons will finally be absorbed, press 1. If you believe the cycle will repeat again, press 9. The warning stands.